So now we're going to kind of work on refining things. And one of the things, a few of the things that need refinement are, first of all, we need to deal with the player running out of hits and therefore like losing a life. And if we're going to do that, we might as well also do game over as part of that. So that's what we'll do first, and then we will move on to dealing with the enemy colliding with the player and what to do about that. And there are kind of many ways that you can think about that. We're going to implement one thing today, and then you can always decide to do something different later on. So let's get going with this. We are going to start with the player, and we're going to make sure that when the player runs out of hits, loses all their life, that they end up, instead of destroying the instance, which creates problems, of course, we are going to instead lose a life. And then we'll also deal with right after that, when we lose all 3 lives, we got to get to game over. So, in the player, we're going to go to the step event. And we already have code in here that runs when the player runs out of hits, right? The difference is we just destroy the instance, which was fine to begin with. It gave us some way of knowing that all our hits were gone before we had a health bar, and even after we had a health bar. But now that we have lives implemented, we are going to actually make it so they lose a life. So we're going to get rid of this destroy instance. Click on the X will just delete it, or click on it and press the delete key. Both of those work. And instead we're going to set a global variable, and we make sure it's still inside that if statement. And we're going to set the global variable, player lives, to -1. And we're going to click relative, because we don't want the relative, or we want to take 1 away from lives. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but we also need to reset the player's hits back to 10. So we're going to add an assign variable for that, and change this to hits, and change this to 10. This one's not relative, because we want to reset it exactly to 10. Finally, it would be nice to move the player back to the middle of the screen, so that because if they just got hit with a laser, they were obviously in front of a enemy, and so they were probably just shot. So it would be good right now to move them back to the center, so that they aren't in danger of being hit by an enemy, at least right away. And then they can choose to move if they want to. So we're going to reset the player's X coordinate back to the middle of the screen. So let's scroll down to set instance variable. We're going to add that. Leave the X coordinate there. And for the Y coordinate, or for the value I should say, I'm going to go ahead and use an expression. We're going to use room width divided by 2. And that will make sure that no matter what our room width is, we'll always be in the middle, which is what we want. So at this point, that's what should work. And when we play, we're going to go ahead and play and allow the player to die, basically. So I'm going to scoot over and let the player die. Maybe intentionally. There we go. And you see our health resets. We lost a life, and we're back in the middle. Now, the problem, of course, is we still are not, when we run out of lives, it's going to still let us play. And as you can see, even though we run out of lives, we can still play the game, which is a problem. We need to deal with that. So we're going to fix that next. So, kind of the way we're going to do this is we're going to implement a game over state at some point. to do that, we need a flag that's going to keep track of game over, and then we need to turn some things off when the game's over. One of the things that I know games like to do is at the end, when the game is over, they'll add in, they'll just like put game over on the screen, and they'll let kind of the action happen behind it, but nothing will really happen. So that's what I think we're going to do. So what that means is that basically we're going to keep the player from moving or firing, and if we leave the player in the middle, it's not going to matter that the enemies keep flowing, because they're not going to ever shoot at the player. Nothing's going to happen, because they're on either side and they're never going to be in front of the player. It's that simple. So, but what that also means is we should remove all of the stuff from the screen. So we should remove like everything else that's not those things. And so we just need to do that stuff. First thing, we're going to go to Object, Control Object, go to the Create Event, and we're simply going to add one more global variable. Okay, and so I'm going to click the plus to add a global variable called Game Over. And we're going to start with Game Over false, because our game isn't over to begin with. We'll turn it to Game Over when we start. So now that we've got that set up, now we just need to go through and in all the places that we need things to happen and things to change, we want to add an if statement that checks the game over, and then if the game over is, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to draw things if the game over is false, and then simply not draw them if it's true. And the way that GameMaker works is that it always resets the screen before it draws anything new. So if we simply draw things when game over is false and not draw them when it's true, that'll be easy enough. So the first place I'm going to go is the draw loop, or the draw event, I should say, and we're going to put all of this code in an if statement. So I'm going to add an if at the top. If statement. If the global, remember, dot game over, I need to remember that myself, is equal to false, then we'll go ahead and draw all this stuff. Otherwise, we're not going to draw any of it. So I'm going to select all this by pressing and holding Shift and clicking them one by one. And that way, you can see them light up there on the left to show that I've got them. And that way, I can drag them all in at once. So now when I drag them all in, they all are indented, and I can see that right there. I'm going to do the same thing for the player, and in the player, we're going to do several things. So I'm going to go to the player. We are going to, we're going to prevent the player from moving. So we're going to go to the key down left. We're going to add the variable, or the if variable, global dot game over equal to false, and then this time I'm just going to drag them one by one. It's easy enough to drag them, and I only really have to drag the get instance variable in the if. Go to key down right, we'll do the same thing. At the top, add the if variable, global dot game over, and then values false. Get the instance variable there, if variable there. Okay, so now we've stopped moving. We also want to prevent firing. So we're going to go to the key press for space. Same thing. Add the if variable at the top, global dot game over equal to false. Zoom in so you can see that real clear. And then move both the create instances inside of that if statement. Finally, we want to turn off the health bar, because if the game's over, there's no need to have the health bar sitting there. So I'm going to go to the draw event. I'm just going to put the if variable ahead of the health bar. I want to leave the draw self though, because I want to see the player on the screen. We're just not going to be moving or firing. So false, and then put the health bar in there. Okay. Now, that should be fine for game over. So now we're going to test the game over and see if it works. So we're going to make sure we just go ahead and let everything, let the enemies kill me. There we go. Better if I can get them more. There we go. Now, I've run out of lives. Oh, you know what I didn't do? I have to actually check and see if the game's over. So we're going to go to the OBJ control, and we're going to add a step event. And then the step event, all we're going to do is check if the player's lives, global dot player lives, is less than or equal to 0. Then we want to flip the game over to true. And again, we'll set a global variable so that we know we don't have to use the global dot ahead of that. Now that should fix what we were doing. Set up everything, and then best laid plans get kind of messed up. So here we go. Let's try and get killed real quick. And there's one. Maybe that's not working. Okay. And you'll notice that the other thing that's going on here is that we'll deal with in a little bit. Okay. But now you see the players, the enemies keep coming, but I can't move. I'm pressing the left and right keys and pressing space, and it's not working. And that's what we want to see. So the only other thing that we should do is add in the game over text to the middle of the screen, which means I'm going to go back to the draw event, and I'm going to add an else to this if, because if the game over is true, I do want to do something. So I'm going to add the else. It's going to jump all the way down to the bottom under all that text, and we're going to just draw the words game over in the middle of the screen in, I think we'll draw in red. So the things I have to do, though, is I have to first set the font, which is going to be the game font, FNT game. And then I need to change the color. We're going to change it to red. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck the use alpha box. Then we're going to set the text alignment to center middle. That way we're right in the middle of the screen. Oh, it'll be drawn in the middle of whatever coordinates I give. Then we'll draw the value in the middle of the screen. Remember, when you use draw value, you don't have to give a value. That's how we draw just text. So if I type game over and I don't give a value, I don't have to give a value. It'll just draw the text game over. To draw in the middle of the screen, the easy way to make sure it's always going to be in the middle is to use the room width and room height. So if I do room width divided by 2, and I do room height divided by 2, then that should put it in the center. So now I'm going to go ahead and one more time we're going to run it and let the player die 3 times. We'll all end up with, we should end up with a game over message as well. There's almost there, and then we'll of course deal with the player and enemy colliding. Okay, and there's our game over message that we were looking for, and so that's working. So now we need to deal with the player and the enemy colliding. The first thing you're going to want to do is determine what's going to happen to the player based on the collision. So I'm going to go to the player. We're going to add the collision event for the enemy. Okay. So we know this is the event we're going to use. It's just a matter of what code we put in there that is going to express what we want to do. Okay. The main thing is that the player is going to lose some life. And then the other thing is we need to make sure that the enemy is destroyed. So what you can do a variety of things to do this. So we're going to use an assign variable because we're going to use hits, and we're going to use relative, and it's just a matter of how much damage you want the player to take. I would stick with a set amount of damage, but you can also simply destroy the player. So you could actually assign the hits variable to 0 and then unclick the relative, and that would trigger the loss of life, which would then do all the things that does. So that's an option. You can also have it use however much life is left for the enemy. You would just do what? You'd use other dot hits to do that. Other is always the reserved word for the other object or the other instance in a collision. I'm going to choose 3. And I use 3 because 3 is the maximum amount of life that an enemy has. And just because they've lost some life doesn't mean that they aren't going to do any less damage to us. So I'm going to use 3, and I'm going to click relative. Now the second part is, when the enemy is destroyed, because they're going to be destroyed, do you want to give credit for the player destroying an enemy, and thus give them points? Okay? If not, you would simply use a destroy instance. And it would just destroy the instance, and it would be done. I'm going to give credit for destruction and give points. It essentially rewards the player for, gives the player another avenue of attacking, as long as they understand that they lose life, they lose a significant amount of life. So what we can do is we can add an assign variable, but this time I'm going to click the arrow and I'm going to apply to the other. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to lower their hits to 0 straight up, because I already have code in the enemy object for adding points when their hits reaches 0. So that code is here in the step event. Right? In the step event, when hits equals 0, we destroy the instance and we add to the score. So in this case, if I just destroy the instance, it wouldn't add any points. But if I lower the hits to 0, it would add the points. And it does the same thing, and both of them in kind of one line of code. So now, if I collide with an enemy, I should see a significant drop in hits on the player. Hope you know what I didn't do though? I didn't make this negative. That's what it was. Okay. -3 instead of so. And you would put negative other dot hits if you want to use that route. But here we go again. Let's try this again. So I'm going to try and run into somebody, and now there we go. But now I'm not like down to half, so I don't know if I'm always going to do that, and that might destroy me as well. So that's something though for the player to decide, not for you to decide, and that's all we're going to do in this.